Subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on 9 forest management and fire suppression bills. H.R. 188 by Mr. McClintock, H.R. 1450 by Mr. Fulcher, H.R. 1726, Representative Takuda, H.R. 3522, Mr. Moore, 3499 by Mr. Issa, H.R. 3389 by Representative Valadeo, H.R. 3396 by Representative Harder, and Ranking Member Negus's Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnerships Act of 2023. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be allowed to participate in today's hearing from the dais. The gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo and Mr. Issa. The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Bobert. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Moore. And the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda. Without objection, so ordered. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made a part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Last week, an article appeared in Politico arguing that the progressive left should get behind permitting reform because delay is a form of climate denialism. In making this case for speeding up our country's environmental analyses, an official was quoted as stating, "Yes, we can respect our environmental laws and we can move quickly at the same time." You may be surprised to learn this official was not a Republican governor or member of Congress, but rather Democrat Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. While this committee has had some productive conversations on forest management this year, there is still too often a disconnect between what my friends on the other side of the aisle say about permitting reform versus Democrats in their own White House. The reality is this isn't just a funding and staffing issue. We must reform laws like NEPA, and we have to do it now. We need to speed up the bureaucracy that's been slowing down forest management projects for decades if we want to truly confront the wildfire crisis. What's true for clean energy projects is also true for forest management. We can streamline reviews for these projects and still respect our nation's environmental laws. For too long, we've been told that streamlining, like categorical exclusions, undermine bedrock environmental laws. This catchphrase of the left has lost virtually all meaning because it is often said without providing any evidence that these reviews will actually lead to worse environmental outcomes. If anything, the opposite is true. We have seen time and time again that streamlining the bureaucracy has led to better environmental outcomes and better outcomes for local communities. Lake Tahoe is a prime example of this. Just 2 years ago, the Kelder fire was bearing down on the Lake Tahoe Basin when it entered a hazardous fuels treatment area that was made possible by a Tahoe-specific categorical exclusion. These treatments dramatically slowed the fire and gave wildland firefighters the ability to fight back and save over 600 homes. Nearby Grizzly Flats, which is less than 100 miles from this area, was ineligible for this 10,000-acre categorical exclusion. The result? A planned hazardous fuels project was delayed for nearly a decade and incomplete when the Kelder fire occurred. The community was virtually wiped from the map. The Tahoe categorical exclusion was the difference maker in these two situations, and it is the type of tool that should be afforded to all of our national forests. That's why I'm supportive of Congressman McClintock's Proven Forest Management Act, which would expand the use of categorical exclusions that has inarguably saved communities without compromising any level of environmental analysis. We will also be considering Congressman Moore's Firesheds Act, which builds upon cutting-edge Forest Service research to prioritize landscape-scale fuels reduction treatments to protect the most at-risk communities across the West. Anybody who supports the Forest Service's 10-year Confronting the Wildfire Crisis strategy needs to support this legislation, which complements it by using the same fire shed research. The Forest Service has often called the bipartisan infrastructure law a down payment on the funding for the 10-year strategy, but it's far past time for us to put a down payment on the streamlining necessary to actually complete this work. We're over a year into the implementation of this strategy, and without addressing our permitting challenges, we will never meet the lofty goals set by the Forest Service. I'm also supportive of Representative Fulcher's Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, which would improve the co-stewardship of federal lands with our tribal partners. This bipartisan bill, which recently passed out of the House Ag Committee on a 59-0 vote, should be a no-brainer. My home state of Wisconsin is a leader in the use of good neighbor authority, and I'm excited to see legislation moving that will help improve this vital tool. In addition to these forest management tools, we'll be considering some thoughtful wildfire suppression legislation, including Congressman Issa's Direct Hire to Fight Fires Act, Congressman Valadeo's Emergency Wildfire Fighting Technology Act, and Congressman McClintock's fire suppression legislation. These bills are the first step in fulfilling key guiding principles for this subcommittee, that we must put wildland firefighters into winnable situations, and we must address their challenges in a fiscally responsible manner. As is the case with forest management, we must remember that this is not simply a funding issue. While we need to ensure better and equitable pay for our wildland firefighters, we must also cut the unnecessary red tape that's preventing us from hiring these men and women in the first place. We must also make sure our current fire suppression practices aren't needlessly putting firefighters into harm's way. I'd like to thank all the members on both sides of our dais for their leadership on the important bills before us today. I also want to thank all the witnesses for being here and traveling long distances to provide your expert testimony. I look forward to hearing from each of you. With that, we'll just, yeah. So we will hear from the ranking member, Representative Neguse, when he arrives. But now I would like to recognize Representative McClintock for 5 minutes in regards to, let's see, 2 bills, H.R. 188 and H.R. 934. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've done such a good job describing them. I'm not quite sure what I have left, but I'll give it a try here. H.R. 188, the Proven Forest Management Act, extends an existing law passed with bipartisan support and signed by President Obama in 2016. That's the law that provided a categorical exclusion from the National Environmental Policy Act for forest thinning projects up to 10,000 acres under certain conditions within the Tahoe Basin. Under NEPA, a simple forest thinning project now requires an average of 4 years of environmental studies that produce reports often exceeding 800 pages. They cost millions of dollars to produce, often more than the value of the timber that we're removing. Federal timber auctions that once produced millions of dollars to the federal government and to the local communities affected now end up costing money, so not a lot of it gets done. Federal timber harvests in the Sierra have declined 80% as a result. The Lake Tahoe categorical exclusion has now been in effect for 8 years. It's taken the review time for thinning projects from 4 years down to less than 4 months. It's cut the reports from 800 pages down to a few dozen. Under this authority, the Tahoe Basin Management Unit has increased the removal of excess timber from 1 million board feet a year to an average of 9 million board feet. Treated acreage in the Tahoe Basin has tripled. Mr. Chairman, you very clearly laid out what I like to call the tale of 2 cities from the Caldor fire. One that was subject to this authority, saved from the fire, and the other, Grizzly Flats, which was not covered by this authority, utterly and completely destroyed. The other bill, H.R. 934, requires the Forest Service to aggressively attack all fires as soon as they're spotted, and it provides authority for local fire departments to initially attack all fires on Forest Service land. This used to be known as the 10 a.m. rule. Its abandonment has led to many instances of small fires that could have been easily extinguished, exploding out of control instead. Perhaps most famous was the Yellowstone fire in the 1980s. In response, Reagan immediately reinstated the 10 a.m. rule, only to have that order later abandoned. The policy of allowing fires to burn is based on the premise that active suppression of fires leads to a buildup of excess fuel, and that's right as far as it goes. If you're not going to remove excess timber from a forest, you're going to have a lot of fires. And if you put those fires out, yes, you're going to have bigger fires. But that's the whole point of forest management, to remove excess timber before it can burn. Nature doesn't mind waiting a century for a forest to regrow. We mere mortals don't have that luxury. A few years ago, the Tamarack fire began from a lightning strike, and it smoldered for 10 days on a quarter acre of forest land. Now, the Forest Service sent helicopters over it every day to take pictures for its Facebook page, but it never bothered to drop a single bucket of water to put the fire out. Worse, it forbade local fire agencies from putting out the fire themselves. On the 10th day, the Tamarack fire burst out of control. It ended up destroying 17,000 acres of forest land and about 80 homes. Now, their excuse was, well, it wasn't doing anything, so they decided to just monitor it. Well, I put the question to them, if you found a rattlesnake curled up in a corner of your bedroom that wasn't doing anything, would you simply monitor it until it did? The Forest Service recognized how dangerous this policy was after the Tamarack fire and at least temporarily ordered initial attack on all fires in the Sierra. This bill simply makes that policy permanent. Mr. Chairman, remember, only you can prevent forest fires. Maybe not all of them, but I can say with confidence that these two bills that restore proven forest management policies will prevent many forest fires and save many communities from the catastrophe visited on towns like Grizzly Flats. So let's not waste any more time. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative McClintock. Next, I recognize Mr. Moore from Utah. His bill, the Firesheds Act. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Nagoose, and other distinguished members of the committee. It is always great to be back. So thank you for welcoming me and for keeping this really, really important piece of legislation on the forefront. My team and I and the entire state of Utah, and once all Americans learn about it, which I'm sure they're going to study it all tonight, they are going to appreciate it as well. This is simply a bill that is geared towards taking good data, good process, and trying to implement it across our country. And so I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. And again, this is called Firesheds Act, and appreciate the consideration. I introduced this bill with my friends Congressman Cuellar in the House and Senator Risch in the Senate. And as the summer season approaches, we stand on the brink of another wildfire season that will threaten communities, lands, family, businesses, and more across our nation. And I want to put it into context. Utah has had significant drought the last few years, and we just experienced our highest snow totals ever. All of our communities in the Wasatch Front are under flood right now. We had an incredibly wet winter, and guess what? Even that leads to higher brush totals and higher potential risk of wildfire. So this occurs in a drought. This occurs in high water years. We have to be able to sincerely look at what we're doing in our forests. So, like I mentioned, fires they form an integral part of our ecosystems. Their rate and severity, though, have increased in recent years. As a result, their impact in our lives and our environment has grown to levels that demand a new management approach. The financial toll of uncontrolled wildfires is staggering. Each year, the Department of the Interior and the U.S. Forest Service collectively expend hundreds of millions of dollars to combat fires, a figure projected to rise consistently. The economic and emotional impact are significant as well. Last year, a fire in Parley's Canyon threatened and forced the evacuation of my constituents, which made this a personal issue for many of us. Furthermore, the environmental consequences of wildfire cannot be overlooked. In 2020, researchers estimated that nearly 112 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to the emissions from approximately 24 million cars driven for just 1 year, were expelled into the atmosphere due solely to California's wildfires in that very year. 24 million cars driven for just 1 year from wildfires. I hope that we all can recognize this is something that we all need to be able to address and get out ahead of. Our current mitigation efforts are falling behind in the intensity of these fires, and without provocative approach, this gap will continue to expand. I introduced the Fire Sheds Act to instigate a comprehensive shift in our approach to wildfire management that will help us better prevent fires before they even begin. The Fire Sheds Act does this by leveraging modern technology to map and manage fire sheds, areas that are particularly susceptible to wildfires, to undertake landscape scale management projects ranked in the top 10% for wildfire exposure. It uses data to target the biggest areas of risk. That's simply put. This targeted science-based strategy will help us mitigate the likelihood of fires within these regions. By facilitating efforts to create fuel breaks to slow or halt fires, implement prescribed burns to rejuvenate ecosystems dependent on fire, and remove unhealthy tree stands to reduce burn risks in the fire-prone areas. We do all this, we can ensure that our ecosystems are healthy and our communities are safe. Because wildfires do not acknowledge state boundaries, the Fire Sheds Act encourages shared stewardship agreements, promoting collaborative partnerships among states and with federal government. This approach has worked well in Utah, and I was honored to join Governor Cox, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, and others for the signing of an updated shared stewardship agreement. As catastrophic wildfires predominantly afflict specific regions, their repercussions reverberate across our nation, underscoring the importance of a unified effort. Republicans and Democrats are united in our interest in safeguarding our natural resources for future generations. As a member of this committee in the 117th Congress, I saw this firsthand and appreciated learning from each of you. The Fire Sheds Act will further this shared goal by modernizing the way we manage lands and breaking down barriers between federal and state governments. I just want to reemphasize the point. Wildfires don't care if you're a red or a blue state. We in Utah have engaged the federal government and the partners that we have there to truly look at a data-driven approach and entered into shared stewardship agreements that we think so many states could partake and actually benefit from, and we strongly encourage that to be recognized as the emphasis of this bill. Thank you again, Chairman Tiffany and Ranking Member Nagoose, for the opportunity to join you today. I hope the sense of urgency we feel can unite us behind this bipartisan, bicameral bill, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Issa in regards to H.R. 3499, the Direct Hire to Fight Fires bill.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member. I don't have to tell you that California is the home of wildfires. Because of our size and the nature of our breakdown, there is no region in California that doesn't see a fire. Whether it's eastern San Diego County or western Riverside counties, including the Cleveland National Forest, we have enjoyed over 12 wildfires in my district in my 18 years of service. The Cedar fires, the Harris fires, the Witch Creek fires were all devastating. 3 times during my tenure, the President of the United States has come out to look at the devastation. That devastation can be mitigated, and you are working on many solutions. However, we cannot change the weather, and we will not be able to change the reality that there will be wildfires. Governor Newsom and the state of California simply haven't done this kind of protection, and they won't do it as it happens again. The time to plan and prepare isn't after a fire. It's before, when conditions are calm, when winds are tame, when fires are in the future. Just months ago, Governor Newsom bragged about his record budget surplus, and I and others encouraged investments in our future, including fire prevention. That opportunity, pun intended, went up in smoke. Now the state is saddled with a record budget deficit. Make no mistake, Governor Newsom and his team didn't plan to fail, but so far they failed to plan. So now that the budget is in deficit, we need to have a consensus on some solutions. One of those solutions is my bill, Direct Hire to Fight Fires. The bill provides the fire service with direct hire authority it needs to swiftly hire skilled personnel. 58% of California's forest lands are owned and managed by the federal government, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service. In 2022, a combined 2,122 wildfires burned nearly 10,000 acres of land in our state, and yet the Forest Service has limited ability to use direct hire authority. In 2022, the Forest Service was able to use direct hire, and it hired 4,860 people using direct hire and only hired 16 without it. It's clear that Congress must delegate direct hire authority to the Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior to fast-track firefighters' appointments. Wildfire emergencies demand immediate action, and the bureaucracy and red tape shouldn't tie our hands at a time in which our communities are burning. By streamlining the hiring process, this will ensure the ability to get the skilled firefighters who exist quickly which will transform the firefighting service in a way that it never has before. Fires need to be stopped from burning sooner. Every minute you stop a fire is a dramatic amount less fire that you have to stop. And with that, I thank the committee for consideration and yield back.
Thank you, Representative Issa. Next, I'd like to turn to the ranking member for his opening statement of 5 minutes, and I understand congratulations are in order.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, that's exciting.
Share the information
Oh,
with
sure.
everyone.
Well, thank you. First, Chairman Tivity, for your courtesy, and my apologies for the delay in getting to the hearing. As you mentioned, we had some news in our family that a goose family grew by one. So my wife and I had our second child, a son, Joshua. Yeah, over the weekend, which is exciting. So applause. I'll accept that applause on behalf of my wonderful wife, who deserves all of the applause.
Wasn't
It's
intended for
not
you.
my applause. To
Wasn't
receive.
intended for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I will relay that back to Andrea. But anyway, we're over the moon. So very, very blessed. And thank you all to the witnesses for joining us today, for being a part of this important subcommittee hearing. Of course, a pleasure to have Jonathan Agotis, in particular, from the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, testifying today. Today's hearing follows last week's important oversight hearing on forest management, wildfire suppression, and wildland firefighters, and includes several Forest Service bills, as the chairman articulated previously, dealing with some of these issues. Today's bill list, in my view, demonstrates the complexity of topics which we've been discussing thus far this session and the variety of issues that the Forest Service manages. We have seen the devastating impacts of climate change in our forests and our communities as fire seasons continue to increase in frequency and severity. We have to recognize the need to do everything that we can to promote healthy and resilient forests and prioritize community safety. Ensuring that wildland firefighters who put their lives at risk each and every day to protect our constituents are paid a fair salary, receive life-saving benefits, and have access to affordable housing should be at the top of our list. And that's exactly why we are pursuing that path with my bill, Tim's Act. First and foremost, my bill would sustain a well-deserved pay raise to ensure that the reforms that we secured in the last Congress are made permanent. Now, I realize that the bill is not on today's agenda, but I hope we can find a way to work together to get this done. One of my bills is included in today's agenda, the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act of 2023. This bill, by way of background, would extend a program first authorized under the 2018 Agriculture Improvement Act to allow the Forest Service to lease administrative properties to counties, municipalities, or other public entities to provide additional housing resources or address other local needs. It's a great bill. Of course, I'm biased, but believe that it would cut red tape and administrative burdens and ultimately create opportunities for effective collaboration that will help address some of the housing challenges in rural communities. Now, it is by no means a panacea, but as we will hear today from Mr. Godis, who serves on the Glenwood Springs City Council, it is an important tool already being put to good use to provide affordable housing for first responders in my state, in Colorado, like wildland firefighters, and to address Forest Service and other workforce housing capacity needs in our mountain communities. We need to have an all-hands, on-deck approach to support our rural communities and the wildland firefighting workforce, which is why I am so encouraged also to see Representative Harder's Fire Department Repayment Act is included in this agenda. My colleague from California's bill establishes standard operating procedures for fire suppression cost share agreements to ensure reviews are done in a timely manner and local fire departments continue to receive the support that they need and deserve. Like I said at the top of my remarks, the Forest Service has a broad cross-section of responsibilities, which ranges from supporting local communities to protecting our forest and grasslands from the threat of invasive species. Representative Takuda's continued Rapid Ohio Death Response Act will help support ongoing efforts to address the fungal disease attacking native Ohio trees in Hawaii. And I want to thank Representative Takuda for her leadership, and I understand this is her first legislative hearing and the only freshman, I believe, on our list of, our new member, I should say, on our list of bills today. So we're grateful to have her here and to be able to hear her important bill, which will have a profound impact on her state. I want to say thank you to our chairman. I'm encouraged that today's hearing includes 3 bills sponsored by Democratic members. I think that's a significant step in the right direction that moves us closer to the balance that I worked really hard to try to achieve last Congress when I served as chair of this subcommittee. And so I want to thank the chairman for his demonstrated interest in considering bipartisan and Democratic-led legislation. I think we can all agree that our national forests are vital for water conservation, critical habitat, and public recreation. And as we continue this important discussion, I do hope that we can reflect on what many of our witnesses in the past have said before this committee regarding the biggest challenge to our shared forest management priorities, and that is staffing and agency capacity. I suspect we're going to have a robust discussion on those issues and more today, and hope we can work towards bipartisan solutions to address our shared concerns regarding reduced wildfire risk. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you to the ranking member. And next, I'd like to recognize Representative Takuda in regards to H.R. 1726.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Nagus, and congratulations to you and Andrea on your new bundle of joy, and distinguished members of the Federal Land Subcommittee. Thank you for including the continued Rapid Ohio Death Response Act of 2023 in today's hearing, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this important bill. Now, I want you to imagine stepping into a lush native forest, hearing the birds, honey creepers singing in the canopy, and then with a Thanos-like snap of your fingers, 50% of that forest disappears because of what is on the bottom of your shoe. Now that sounds like science fiction, but that is exactly what is happening to one of Hawaii's most iconic trees that makes up 50% of all native forests and covers nearly 1 million acres of forest land throughout Hawaii. Ohia lehua is foundational to our native ecosystems and is endemic to 6 of Hawaii's 8 major islands, making it one of the most prolific of all native trees. Ohia lehua is well adapted to Hawaii's unique climates. It is the first tree that you will see spring up from a recent lava flow along the coast, and it is vital to the creation of new fertile lands. Growing from the coast to 8,000 feet above sea level, it keeps our mountains from eroding, prevents runoff, and protects the watershed for agriculture, drinking water, and other endemic plants and animals. Furthermore, Ohia lehua provides critical habitat for birds and many other species, including many of Hawaii's federally endangered forest birds. Ohia lehua also has an important role in native Hawaiian culture. Its wood was traditionally used to beat bark into clothing, serve as pounding boards to process taro into food, and make weapons in defense of lands. Its leaves were also used for medicinal teas, and its flowers used to make lei and as adornments in traditional practices like hula. Because of the role these trees play in maintaining our forest canopy and watershed, rapid ohia death, or ROD, poses a lethal threat to ecological balance in our islands. Initially reported in 2010, ROD has already spread to tens of thousands of acres and killed over 1 million trees on Hawaii Island alone. Individual trees can die very quickly, their leaves turning brown within a few days and falling off in a matter of weeks. Large swaths of dead ohia trees pose extreme fire risks, especially in today's unstable climate, and are more prone to habitat-modifying noxious weeds and trees like Myconia and strawberry guava, all of which are known to greatly impact watershed health and alter ecosystem function. In April 2018, researchers finally determined that the cause of rapid ohia death was 2 fungal species previously unknown to science. The rod fungi is transmitted through wood, live plants, and soil, and it is thought to have originally come to Hawaii and spread throughout our islands on the shoes of visitors. Despite efforts to contain the spread of rod to Hawaii Island through restrictions on the movement of plant material and increased sanitation programs, rod has now been found on the islands of Oahu, Kauai, and Maui. Because there is no known cure for rod, it has the potential to kill off ohia trees statewide and devastate our precious island ecosystems. While rod poses a critical threat to our native forests, watersheds, critically endangered forest birds, and natural beauty, support for combating rod has been extremely limited. For example, the Lion Arboretum, a local research facility on Oahu, has had to rely on funding through a GoFundMe campaign to further the vital seed banking of ohio lehua. This is why I'm proud to introduce the Continued Rapid Ohia Death Response Act of 2023 alongside Senator Hirono, which would require the Secretary of the Interior to partner and collaborate with the Secretary of Agriculture and the state of Hawaii to address rod. It also supports ongoing detection, prevention, and restoration efforts to combat rod, including federal resources to support critical research and staff. We cannot stand to lose half of all of our native forests in Hawaii. This bill is critical in turning the tide in the fight against rapid ohia death and protecting ohia lehua and Hawaii's unique ecosystems for future generations. And in case you're wondering what ohia lehua looks like, my dress actually has the patterns of the flowers on it now. It is very much a part of our local culture and heritage. So mahalo for all of your support for this important piece of legislation. Thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative Takuda. Next, we're going to move on to our second panel, and this will be in regards to the forest management bills. We have Mr. Troy Heithaker, who's Associate Deputy Chief of the U.S. Forest Service, Mr. Robert Dugan, Chairman of the Placer County Water Agency, Mr. Cody Deshotel, President of the Intertribal Timber Council in Portland, and Mr. Jamie Johansson, President of the California Farm Bureau. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, press the on button on the microphone. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. At the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. Mr. Heithaker, we'll let you kick things off. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Nagoose, and members of the subcommittee. Thanks for this opportunity to testify on the fire and forest management related legislation being considered before the subcommittee today. I currently serve as Associate Deputy Chief of the National Forest System for the USDA Forest Service. I started my career on the Tongass National Forest working in forest management, and prior to this assignment, I served as a forest supervisor on the Ouachita National Forest, one of the most productive and actively managed forests in the country. I've either directly or indirectly been involved with forest management for my entire 25-year career with the Forest Service. In my current position, I'm responsible for policy oversight and direction for natural resource and public service delivery programs across 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands in 44 states and territories that make up the National Forest System. This includes our forest management programs, which are among the focus areas of the bills you are considering today. Before we start the discussion on the bills on today's agenda, I want to call attention to the urgency to invest in our wildland firefighters. As you know, critical infrastructure, homes, community structures, and natural resources are at grave and growing risk of catastrophic wildfire. Across the country, more than 12,000 Forest Service wildland firefighters benefit from the temporary pay increase provided by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Investing in our federal firefighters means averting the pay cliff that thousands of federal wildland firefighters will soon face. The President's budget request builds on the temporary pay increase, and it addresses what we desperately need: a permanent fix to increase in federal wildland and tribal firefighters' pay, increased investments in their mental and physical health and well-being, improvements to their housing options, and an expanded number of permanent firefighters. The permanent pay reforms require authorizing legislation, and we are committed to working with you on advancing a comprehensive legislative proposal. In addition to investing in our wildland firefighters, it's critical that we address work on the ground, which ultimately addresses the wildfire crisis. We are now in our second year of carrying out our 10-year strategy for confronting the wildfire crisis in the West. Our strategy aims to increase science-based fuels treatments by up to 4 times the previous treatment levels, especially in those areas most at risk. The Forest Service is very grateful to Congress for providing the resources to seed our initial work and put the wildfire crisis strategy in motion. While we appreciate every effort that Congress is making to advance the wildfire crisis strategy, we have significant concerns about additional procedural and process requirements. For this reason, we cannot support H.R. 3522, the Fireshed Acts as written. We're also concerned that the Firesheds Act could substitute a science-based approach to fire management with a specific state or governor's interests for a region, overriding existing land management objectives. USDA supports H.R. 1450, treating tribes and counties as Good Neighbors Act. Expanding the authority to retain receipts to tribes and counties would significantly increase county and tribal participation in the Good Neighbor Authority, and in turn help us increase the pace and scale of needed forest management activities. USDA supports many of the goals of H.R. 188, Proven Forest Management Act, but would like to work with the bill sponsors to address the concerns noted in our written testimony. In addition, USDA recognizes the importance of the ohia tree and supports the intent of H.R. 1726, Continued Rapid Ohia Death Response Act. I want to take a moment to discuss the fire suppression, the topic of the second panel on the 5 remaining bills. By Forest Service policy, every fire receives a strategic risk-based response that is appropriate for the circumstances. Each strategy uses the full spectrum of management actions to consider fire and fuel conditions, weather, values at risk, and resource availability. The agency has serious concerns that H.R. 934 would remove critical resource management and firefighting tools and tactics from the interagency responders who have to make life and death decisions. Therefore, we cannot support the bill as written. USDA appreciates the intent of Emergency Wildfire Fighting Technology Act, but does not support the incorporation of containerized systems into our suppression response, given safety and operational concerns. USDA supports the intent of the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnerships Act and the Fire Department Repayment Act, and would like to work with the subcommittee and bill sponsors on them. USDA would also like to work with the subcommittee and bill sponsors on the Direct Hire to Fight Fires bill. In closing, I want to reiterate the agency's commitment to addressing the wildfire crisis. We greatly appreciate the significant resources Congress has provided to help us take the initial steps. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Heithaker. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Robert Dugan, the chairman of the Placer County Water Agency, for 5 minutes. Mr. Dugan.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany. Ranking Member Neguse, congratulations, and members of the subcommittee. PCWA owns and operates the Middle Fork American River Project that provides water supply and generates hydroelectric power in Northern California and supports recreational opportunities for millions of citizens from Placer County into the Bay Area. I'm pleased to be here to testify in support of H.R. 188, legislation that builds on lessons learned on the ground from the last decade of catastrophic wildfires in the West. H.R. 188 would establish a categoric exclusion for select hazard fuel reduction projects up to 10,000 acres that have been developed collaboratively and are consistent with an approved forest plan. H.R. 188 is necessary to meet the 10-year strategy set by the Forest Service to significantly increase the pace and scale of fuel and forest health treatments to address the crisis of wildfire and to protect critical watersheds, at-risk communities, and habitats. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Congress and the Forest Service for the hard work they put into bringing those strategies into the modern reality. H.R. 188 will also help realize the critical investments provided by Congress in the bipartisan infrastructure law to reduce wildfire risk and restore healthy, productive forests for the benefit of everyone and everything dependent on them. Next slide. Showing the footprint here of the wildfires in our forest and our watershed will illustrate why H.R. 188 and the other legislation you're considering is so critical. I'm going to give you a little perspective on our experience on the ground. Since 2014, the American River watershed has suffered 3 major wildfires that you're looking at here: the King, the Caldor, and the Mosquito fires, which collectively burned some 400,000 acres to the ground, predominantly on federal forest lands. Next slide. Last year, the Mosquito Fire alone burned some 76,000 acres. It destroyed power lines that deliver energy to the grid, disrupting critical power supplies for the North State grid throughout our past winter when we needed them desperately. Tens of millions of dollars were lost in revenue, and significant restrictions in power supply were experienced in that region. Further, PCW estimates that approximately 1.3 million tons of topsoil from the forest is eroding into our Oxbow Reservoir as a result of the mosquito fire severity and its impact subsequently on water storage. And finally, 2 major federal roads providing access to the Tahoe and El Dorado National Forests suffered catastrophic damage from the mosquito fire, severely restricting public access to federal lands, access to PCWA's water and power infrastructure, and limiting entire communities' access to critical public health and safety services. Those wildfires caused dramatic changes in forest vegetation structure, soil conditions, and altered stream flows. In 2014, the King Fire led us into a collaboration with the Forest Service, the state of California, and the Nature Conservancy, along with local environmental organizations, to develop our own 30,000-acre restoration project in French Meadows to address this very item. I want to thank the Forest Service for their strong commitment, from the chief all the way down to the folks in the forest. That partnership has been tremendous. Next slide. As was already illustrated by the chair and in your briefing packet, the genesis of HR 188 was the successful use of a categorical exclusion in the South Lake Tahoe Basin. And I'll just, without repeating what has already been said, I'll tell you that forest fighters, firefighters, forest managers, and land managers agree that that project reduced the Caldor fire intensity to the point that they were able to knock the fire down and save countless acres of habitat and the devastation that would have ensued in the Tahoe Basin had we not done that project. Next slide. This is our watershed. Yours, ours, all of ours. This is indicative of watersheds throughout the forested lands in the United States. We look forward to working with the committee as you advance these forest management strategies. 2 additional requests. We are looking for clear policy for short and long-term mitigation for post-fire impacts. And we're also asking for interagency coordination amongst the Forest Service, Department of the Interior, and federal highways so that we can address the issues of infrastructure, access, and egress throughout those forests. In closing, I wish to restate our support for HR 188, which is necessary to address fuels and forest health treatments, and we're available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Cody Desatel, the President of the Intertribal Timber Council, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany and Ranking Member Nagoose. On behalf of the Intertribal Timber Council and its more than 60 member tribes, I appreciate this opportunity to testify on HR 1450 and other legislation today. All of America's forests were once inhabited, managed, and used by Indian people. Today, only a small portion of those lands remain under direct Indian management. On a total of 334 reservations in 36 states, 19.3 million acres of forests and woodlands are held in trust by the United States and managed for the benefit of Indians. Tribes actively manage their forests to provide the subsistence, cultural, and spiritual values important to their tribal membership, while also providing economic revenue, jobs, and forest products that support both tribal and local economies. Catastrophic wildfire can negatively impact all of these benefits for multiple generations. The risk of wildfire to Indian lands is compounded by the thousands of miles of shared boundary with federal agencies, primarily the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. There are countless examples of wildfire spilling over from federal lands onto tribal forests, causing significant economic and ecological losses. These fires regularly pose a risk to human life on Indian lands and have resulted in fatalities. Congress recognized the need for tribes to work closely with their federal neighbors to reduce the threat of fire across shared boundaries. The result was the Tribal Forest Protection Act of 2004, which allows tribes to petition the Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior to perform stewardship activities on their lands adjacent to Indian lands. The 2018 Farm Bill not only expanded TFPA authorities, but also gave tribes and counties the authority to enter into good neighbor agreements with federal agencies. Unfortunately, a drafting error in the final text precludes tribes or counties from retaining revenue generated from GNA projects for planning. This is a key component of building successful GNA stewardship programs, as states have done since 2014. The disparity in funding between tribal forests and other federal forests continues to grow. Without an ability to retain revenue to support tribal capacity, it is unlikely tribals will contribute already limited tribal revenue sources to conduct work on adjacent federal land. After expansion of the authority in the 2018 Farm Bill, the Colville tribe attempted to use the Good Neighbor Authority on the Sam Puel project, which shared approximately 10 miles of boundary with the reservation. However, without the ability to use timber sale revenue to accomplish restoration services, the project was cost prohibitive and the tribe was forced to abandon its plan. GNA provides tribes and federal agencies an additional tool for improving forest health across boundaries. While the scope of GNA projects is slightly narrower than what tribes may accomplish with TFPA and 638 authorities, GNA provides greater latitude in retaining project revenues and building additional capacity. I'd also like to make some brief comments on other legislation that's being considered today. For HR 188, this legislation would provide a 10,000 acre categorical exclusion for fuels treatment projects if those projects are developed in cooperation with various entities. The ITC supports the intent of this legislation and appreciates the requirement to consult with Indian tribes. One technical suggestion is to define the term qualified entity as it applies to the contracting of fuels reduction work. We would also recommend that TFPA and GNA projects automatically qualify for the categorical exclusion if they meet the other criteria. Also on HR 4664, ITC supports the intent of this legislation, which would categorically exclude certain fuels reduction projects from NEPA evaluation and limits judicial review if those projects are developed through a collaborative process, a community wildfire protection plan, or resource advisory committee. The bill also authorizes the use of GNA to perform covered projects. The ITC recommends the bill be amended to include TFPA projects as eligible and to align the amendments of the underlying GNA statute reflected in HR 1450 to ensure that if GNA were used under this bill, tribes are fully eligible to participate. And with that, I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Dosatel. I'd like to recognize our final panelist on this panel, Mr. Jamie Johansson, President of the California Farm Bureau. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Nagoose, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jamie Johansson, and I'm a first-generation farmer producing olives and citrus fruit in Oroville, California. I also serve as the president of California Farm Bureau, California's largest farm organization, representing nearly 30,000 members. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of the Firesheds Act. California's wildfires are very personal to me. As president of my organization, I have witnessed and heard the numerous stories of loss and frustration from our members, in addition to I myself and my employees and my family have been wildfire evacuees. With the presence of 18 national forests in California, nearly half of the 100 million acres in our state are managed by the federal government. Given the extensive number of wildfire-related impacts California's ranchers are facing, California Farm Bureau has a vested interest in quality and quantity of forest management activities. Recognizing the need for robust financial resources, California Farm Bureau supported the inclusion of forest management funding in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. While the recent influx in forest management funding is encouraging, we remain concerned about the expediency in which treatments on federally owned lands are being performed. To address backlog and achieve landscape scale management, we must enhance capacity, speed up collaborative processes by empowering multiple jurisdictions and partners. Partnerships that assist the Forest Service with permitting, NEPA processes, and on-the-ground work should be expanded. Private industry, including foresters and ranchers within our own membership, are highly skilled, trained, and operate equipment that could assist the Forest Service with vegetative removal, as well as fire suppression activities. In many cases, these individuals are also personally knowledgeable about the local communities, lands, and landscapes, bringing additional contributions to projects. It is also important that forest management activities utilize the best available data so that resources are effectively utilized. For these reasons, we are pleased to offer comments in support of the Firesheds Act, HR 3522, which would allow governors to enter into joint agreements with federal land management agencies and designate landscape scale emergency fireshed management areas in areas of highest risk. We especially like that this legislation provides flexibility, allowing agreements to be updated as new wildlife threats emerge. The bill also smartly allows fireshed areas to contain both federal and non-federal land, furthering collaboration and partnership. For each emergency fireshed management area, the Secretary and the Governor would complete a joint assignment. We strongly support these assignments, including timelines and long-term benchmark goals for the completion of identified projects. Additionally, the inclusion of memorandums of understanding in the bill will allow for the assessments to be continually updated. This will help ensure that the best available data from private entities, research or education institutions, and state sources is applied. We are also appreciative that the bill seeks to align fireshed management projects in accordance with fireshed management plans and allows for utilization of existing statutory and administrative authorities. The Firesheds Act also correctly recognizes livestock grazing, an often overlooked hazardous fuels reduction strategy. Grazing can be an effective management tool for Forest Service to improve range condition, manage for fire, and control invasive species. In addition to the Firesheds Act and other legislation being discussed today, we believe that the 2023 Farm Bill presents an opportunity to build upon the successes of the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills. We encourage Congress to include a robust forest title that enhances the Good Neighbor Authority, addresses inadequate markets and infrastructure for low to no value materials, enhances fuel break cross-boundary collaboration, removes barriers to increasing pace and scale, increases contracting and procurement efficiency, and prioritizes reforestation and post-fire rehabilitation. The unfortunate reality is we are playing catch-up with a situation that has been worsening for decades, further exacerbated by drought, disease, and changing climate. California's private landowners are unable to increase the pace and scale of forest management on their own. Collaboratively, we must remain committed to finding solutions if we want to achieve fire-resilient landscapes. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on these critical issues, and I'm pleased to respond to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johansson. I'm now going to recognize members for 5 minutes for questions, and I will begin the process. Mr. Johansson, what I'm hearing from you say in your testimony is that you can help, that your members can help in the California Farm Bureau. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's certainly in any sort of disaster or natural disaster, the first responders are often the landowners or neighbors. I mean, historically, there would be smoke on the horizon and everyone would respond. I think right now we're seeing devastating floods in the Tulare Lake now reemerging down in Tulare and Kings County. It is farmers, it is ranchers who are responding to shore up those levees. The same happens also in wildfire situations. But most importantly, too, as we grow upon the Good Neighbor Authority, is including those locals, those counties who understand those fire sheds. And perhaps it's burned before, maybe on a smaller scale, but understand how it responded 30 to 40 years ago. So certainly the front lines there can be your locals on the ground and your farmers and ranchers.
Thank you. Mr. Heithaker, in my opening remarks, I said we can respect our environmental laws and we can move quickly at the same time. From your time as a forest supervisor, would you agree that the Forest Service can utilize categorical exclusions to respect environmental laws and move quickly at the same time?
Yes, thank you for the question. The Forest Service has internally made concerted efforts to streamline our processes, and that includes a nationwide monitoring program. An effort started a while ago, environmental analysis and decision-making helped us look at ways to be more efficient internally. As you know, as we've testified on prior, 85% of our NEPA decisions are made through categorical exclusions. That's about 1,400 a year, and that's up from 70% around 10 years ago. All of those categorical exclusions comply with all statutory, regulatory, and policy requirements to implement that work on federal lands.
Do you believe that categorical exclusions undermine bedrock environmental laws?
They do not. They have to comply with all of those environmental laws. They are just another category of NEPA decisions. It's just excluded from analysis due to the fact that they've been determined with CEQ to not have a significant impact to the human environment.
With your first answer, this is something this committee and subcommittee is going to be watching very closely. is that we are getting the treatments done, because that is something that is very concerning with all the additional money that has been going out, that there are a significant number of treatments that are getting done. One more question, is the 10,000 acre categorical exclusion that is currently only available for the Tahoe Basin an example of where the Forest Service has been able to move quickly while respecting environmental laws?
Yes, I think if we look across our landscapes and how we operate, there's, the size of our decisions is often, in excess of 10,000 acres, 30,000, 40,000, where we find that there are no significant impacts. And having tools to help us do that work at scale faster is a benefit to us.
Mr. Desautels, you commented about how the drafting error in regards to the Good Neighbor Authority, I believe it was in the 2018 Farm Bill, it's my understanding you were forced to abandon a project on the Colville National Forest. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The Congress expanded the authority for tribes and counties to enter into the agreements, but later in the act, in a section that would have allowed them to expend revenues generated from forest products, tribes and counties were not included in that section, and this bill would address that.
How many acres of fire-prone federal lands do you estimate you would have been able to treat if that would have been in place?
So that project area was roughly 30,000 acres, prior 40,000 acres, but the west quarter of that burned in the 2015 fire season for us. So that's something we're currently working on under a Tribal Forest Protection Act agreement, but we've seen significant fires all around that area since the 2015 fire season.
So if you could have done that treatment if the 2018 law would have allowed that treatment, how many acres would have that helped not succumb to fire?
So it's hard to predict how much we would have stopped it, because 2018 was a significant year, worse fire behavior than I'd seen at any point in my career, but almost certainly it would have reduced the fire effects. And I think it falls into one of those scenarios where we just aren't moving fast enough, that we're seeing projects burn during the planning process because the planning processes are lengthy.
Mr. Johansson, can we address this wildfire crisis without some reforms of NEPA?
Well, I mean, I think
Can you do it solely with funding? Or is it going to take some reforms?
No, it does take reforms. I mean, in California, we enjoyed a $100 billion surplus in our state budget. It's easy to throw money at a project, and we've thrown a lot of money at trying to address this in California. But as I've said before, just throwing money at a problem such as wildfire and forest thinning doesn't work unless you're actually doing the project and the project gets finished. It has to be expedited. We see, even locally, I mean, heard if you're doing a mechanical thinning project, it could take up to 3 years to get approval in the forest, 4 years if it's a control burn, but theoretically, those are averages. We hear stories, and I get phone calls of frustrations from people in Murphy's, California, and Calaveras County, who are on their 7th and 8th year. So the expedited process has to go into effect in terms of how we rely on those forest plans that our foresters put together. And they're thorough and extensive and take a very long time. That should ultimately be what drives and moves forward projects, and not just.
Yeah, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Chief, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I've introduced the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act, along with my colleague, Senator Bennett, in the Senate, which extends an existing authority that I know is being utilized right now in my district in Colorado, in the White River National Forest. That particular project, as you may know, plans to develop 163 affordable housing units in a community adjacent to the country's most visited national forest. The project includes a set-aside for Forest Service employees. Now, in your testimony, you mentioned that the lack of affordable housing is a major barrier to recruiting and retaining your workforce, including the wildfire workforce. And I wonder if you might be able to provide some insight or perhaps expound a bit on how your agency works with project proponents to strike an appropriate balance between supporting both federal employees and the general housing needs.
Yes, thank you for the question. I am familiar with that project. I've worked closely with the Forest Supervisor, Scott Fitzwilliams, down there on the White River, and we do appreciate the authority given to us in that act. It's given us an opportunity that while it has taken some time to figure out the nuances, as you can imagine, it's a complicated process, but the ability to partner in areas, especially in neighboring national forests, where Summit County, for instance, housing prices are exorbitant. There's not a land available to develop homes. We have the land. We're able to work with these partners and through this leasing authority provide affordable housing to their employees and our employees. It's a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to working on the expansion of it and continuing to build more in the housing world.
Well, I thank you for your remarks, and I couldn't agree more, and it underscores why the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act is so important in terms of ensuring that the Forest Service has these authorities into the future. Ultimately, the bill is about collaboration and cooperation, and that's something that we take great pride in Colorado, and I think this is an example, a way in which the Forest Service can apply that same model, perhaps in other communities across the country. I wonder if I suspect the agency has given some thought internally as to what other potential sites might exist to the extent that this legislation is enacted and the authority is extended.
Yes, absolutely. We have, as you know, affordable housing, firefighter pay, two of the biggest barriers to getting more firefighters on, retaining firefighters, investing in their health and well-being. And as I mentioned earlier, the number of communities that are in or adjacent to national forest systems that have housing costs that are just plain aren't affordable to people is a challenge that we're trying to overcome. And we have a couple other pilot opportunities that we're looking at and really looking forward to successfully implementing the project on the White River.
Well, again, I thank you for your testimony. I think this is a program worth supporting and extending, and so I'm hopeful that my colleagues will support it. And with that, I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to the ranking member. I'd like to turn to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dugan, the provisions of H.R. 188 have been in place for nearly 8 years now in the Tahoe Basin Management Unit. And it's already been noted that when the Caldor fire hit a treated tract, as it barreled down on the city of South Lake Tahoe, it laid down and the firefighters were able to stop it. Meanwhile, in the adjacent El Dorado forest, U.S. foresters had been trying to treat the trestle project for more than a decade. They knew it was critical to protecting the town of Grizzly Flats, but the laws and the litigation arising from those laws had stalled the project, and it was still pending when the Caldor fire hit the tract, exploded, and utterly destroyed the entire town. Does the categorical exclusion under this authority, so I guess the first question is, why shouldn't we extend that to the 193 acres of the U.S. Forest Service? Can you think of any reason not to?
Well, I would submit to you as has already been referenced, there are significant, sufficient environmental safeguards, even under a categorical exclusion, where we've got compliance built in. So I see no reason why we wouldn't want to expand that categorical exclusion to all of these areas that we need to treat. We've shown it works. Environmentalists are happy.
Before we lose another town of Grizzly Flats, or a few years back, a town of Paradise. Have you observed a difference between the private forests in the Sierra and those under the care of the federal government?
Well, reality is yes, the private forests are able to respond. The private forests are also able to reforest quicker. So there's a lot of issues there, but when it comes to the topic for today's hearing, absolutely. And that's why we need the categorical exemptions, because we know the system works so slow in permitting.
Mr. Johansson, what have you observed regarding the condition between the private forests and the federal forests in the Sierra?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mr. Dugan. It can be quite obvious, even traveling on Interstate 80 there in California, going to Nevada into the Tahoe Basin. You can definitely tell there is a difference in terms of active management of those forest grounds on private forest grounds.
You know, when they say, well, it's climate change, I think how clever of the climate to know exactly the boundary line between the private and federal lands and only devastate those on the federal side of the boundary line. Mr. Heithacker, I'm wondering about something. Half of California's forests are privately owned, the other half are administered by the Forest Service. And as has just been pointed out, you can tell the boundary lines between the private and federal lands just by the condition of the forests. Private lands are usually healthy, they're well managed, tree density is matched to the ability of the land to support it, And they actually make money doing that. The federal lands, the lands that you are responsible for, are densely overgrown, stressed, and dying. And you lose money doing that. You know, 5 years ago, I toured the footprint of the King Fire. The private lands, owned by Sierra Pacific Industries in this case, had been completely salvaged, and the funds generated from that salvage had been used to suppress brush growth, and you could see new, young, healthy trees that were already planted and growing. The federal lands, again, the lands that you are responsible for, had been abandoned. 6 feet of brush had grown up on those forest lands. No trees had been salvaged. And so all you could see was dry brush and dry, rotted trees falling on top of that dry brush, a perfect fire stack. In fact, the firefighters in the Caldor fire tell me when the fire hit the King Fire footprint, it literally exploded because of the neglect of your agency. So private landowners make money keeping their forests in healthy condition, and you somehow manage to lose money keeping our forests in decrepit condition. Would you care to explain yourself?
I'll give it a shot. Thank you for that. I would say that we are working currently with the National Alliance of Forest Owners on a couple of agreements to help streamline some of that work across boundaries. We recognize the importance of that.
How do you explain the difference? You lose money keeping our forests in decrepit condition. Private landowners make money keeping their forests in healthy condition. I mean, why should anybody listen to your agency on matters of forest management, given that record?
I'd like to think that the agency has a very stout and educated group of scientists supporting our
Would you like to
decisions.
explain why the difference?
Well, our agency is guided by different rules and standards in those private lands. I think you're aware of that, which is National Forest Management Act, Multiple Use Sustained Act, the National Environmental
Well, those
Policy Act, and
laws were
others.
supposed to improve the condition of the forest. We've lived with them for 50 years now. I think we're entitled to ask, how are the forests doing? And the answer is absolutely damning. And for your agency to stand in the way of any legislation designed to remediate that problem, I find appalling. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I turn to the committee chairman, Mr. Want to move on? We are going to go to a subcommittee chairman, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. St. Louis County, Minnesota is the largest county east of the Mississippi River, as well as my home county. St. Louis County is a checkerboard of federal and non-federal land. It is also one of the best examples of an area where all parties need to work together, be it the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service that manage our federal lands, or the local tribes and counties that manage our non-federal lands. Given this necessary collaboration that I have seen in northern Minnesota, I support enabling our leaders to work together and expanding Good Neighbor Authority. I am proud to support H.R. 1450, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, which has been introduced by my good friend and colleague, Congressman Fulcher. Congressman Fulcher has been a leader in our conference on forest management, and I want to thank him for introducing this important piece of legislation that builds upon the success of Good Neighbor Authority. Mr. Heathecker, in 2018, Congress expanded the Good Neighbor Authority in the Farm Bill, expanding the program to counties and federally recognized Indian tribes. Can you speak to how participation in Good Neighbor Authority agreements increased following the changes made in the 2018 Farm Bill?
Yeah, thank you. I think as it's been pointed out here, it's important to note that I think as it was an oversight or an omission from that language to not have revenues retained by the tribes and the counties has been a barrier. With that said, we still have worked with numerous states, including the state of Arkansas, where I came from, to leverage that capacity to work across boundaries to implement restoration treatments that do include timber value as well as prescribed fire. Critical to collaborate with multiple agencies within each of those states, whether it's Fish and Wildlife to protect critical habitat, to work with them on administering the timber sales, allow them to generate the revenue to help them do that work and build capacity to support that work. So absolutely think that we will benefit if we can get the retention of revenues for tribes and counties and allow us to expand that opportunity, as was already shared today. And as you know, the opportunities exist, and where we can make those more effective and more accessible, it's going to benefit all of us.
I appreciate your comments. Mr. DeSautel, you represent over 60 tribes that make up the Intertribal Timber Council, and in your testimony, you noted the benefits that you have seen under the Good Neighbor Authority program. Would you say that the tribes that you represent have missed out on the potential added benefits of Good Neighbor Authority since the 2018 Farm Bill only allows states to utilize funds from timber sales?
Yes, sir. I think if the authority had been expanded or the language had been corrected early, that tribes would have utilized that authority early to take advantage of the funding that's available in the infrastructure bill to help support good neighbor agreements. Because for the states that I'm familiar with, Washington State, where I live being one of them, the state had to put in essentially seed money to stand up the program, to establish staffing, and develop the project planning and NEPA analysis on the first projects to generate enough revenue to support that work going forward. So with this funding, it would have given tribes the opportunity to generate that revenue, stand up that program, build that capacity, to utilize that authority for an extended period of time to do that treatment that's needed on adjacent federal land.
With the hopeful passage of this legislation, they'll be able to just do exactly what you stated, invest more, and the money comes directly to them. It is clear that since its introduction over 2 decades ago, the Good Neighbor Authority program has facilitated co-stewardship of our federal and non-federal lands and has brought federal land managers, states, counties, and our tribes together. Over these past 2 decades, Congress has taken great steps to improve and expand Good Neighbor Authority. And I commend the provisions in the 2018 Farm Bill. However, we have a great opportunity right now to continue this success story and make changes that fully take advantage of the Good Neighbor Authority in Mr. Fulcher's legislation. I strongly support allowing counties and tribes to utilize proceeds from timber sales to take additional steps to work together and protect our federal and non-federal lands. And I look forward to supporting Mr. Fulcher's bill that will make this fix. It's important to recognize that the 3 entities, states, counties, and tribes can take advantage of this and allow healthy forests and conservation, along with financial security with those funds returns back to those same entities. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Next, I'd like to turn to the gentlewoman from New Mexico for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Neguse, and for the members on this conversation. As you know, I always look forward to it when we have the bipartisan support for including tribes, recognizing them as sovereign nations, and that we must include them in our various legislation to ensure that they are able to take care of and participate as sovereign nations in our many programs that we have on the federal level. Thank you so very much for your testimony. I'm also really pleased to have in today's hearing the inclusion of ranking members Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act, because affordable housing is important everywhere I go in my district. As we know, the issue of affordable housing is important across this country. Workforce housing is very, very important. I focused on that both before I got to Congress and then when I'm able to through our community projects, through our congressionally supported projects. And in places that are really gorgeous and beautiful, it's sometimes even harder, right? Because the market prices, regular folks just out of the market. And so in places like Santa Fe and Taos, we really see that as very important. Mr. Heithacker, can you discuss a little bit more about the ability to lease administrative sites that would benefit the Forest Service and what that looks like on the ground?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It is it's a unique authority for us. I mean, just think about it. If you're a private landowner and you want to lease part of your property, let somebody else build a house and have other people live there. I mean, it's just the complexities of working that out. It's an interesting arrangement. So the authorities given within that act are really, they're new. We're trying to figure those out, and we're learning as we go. But that exact situation is what we're working on in Dillon, Colorado, which is we have a chunk of administrative land that's being underutilized. We have both the city, the county, state, and the Forest Service who have employees that can't afford housing there. So through that authority, we're allowed to lease the land to the city in this case, and have them build housing to basically offset the cost of that lease. They allow us to have our employees stay there. So it's a really beneficial, mutually agreeable arrangement that provides affordable housing to both the city of Dillon and the Forest Service. And also in Colorado, we're working with another group to look at another model to work directly with the state on how we can accomplish that in other communities throughout that area and others in the country.
Right, and I look forward to you looking at sites in New Mexico because
Absolutely.
I think the ability to utilize lands that are available to their best purpose is part of that. Touch a little bit about, you said how the complexities of doing it. What does it do in terms of being able to recruit and retain employees to know that they will have housing close by? Because if they don't have it there, what would a commute look like?
Well, it's really one of the biggest challenges we have, as I mentioned, in addition to firefighter pay. But if you're a firefighter coming in, you're working these really long and grueling shifts, really risking your life in many cases. And folks can't afford to, folks live in their cars. I mean, that's what they're up against in some of these communities. I mean, the community of Dillon in itself, Summit County in general, is one of the more expensive areas that we have employees. And the fact that we can create at least some solution to allow folks across these other sectors to live there and be able to afford to live there. I mean, it's a night and day experience for them, a game changer from my perspective.
And I think that touching upon that, we are asking somebody to risk their lives to help protect our forests, because they are often, there's lots of important reasons to suppress, to address wildfires, but they're sleeping in their cars.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the same thing in terms of when we're looking at pay, right? And making sure that we have presumptions with regard to the illnesses that they cover. So I think that recognizing there is a wide range of needs that those who are at greatest risk need, that ranging from housing to pay to the presumptions with regards to illness is very important. So thank you for answering those questions, and thank you for introducing the bill. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. Next, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I'm start with or I guess it's Deputy Chief Heidecker. The HR 934 proposes to require the Secretary of Agriculture to carry out the activities to suppress wildfires. In meeting with various timber companies back in Oregon, they asked me if I would just do one thing when I got here, and that is to convince the Forest Service to put out the fire the moment they see it, as opposed to allowing it to burn. This legislation would do exactly that. Would you suggest that this legislation is not necessary right now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As we stated in our testimony, the concerns that we would have is that we would lose tools that are critical for us fighting fires. And if you look at our data, it's 96 or 98% of all of our fires are caught within the first 24 hours. So you have a very small percentage that are not, and I think it's 1% that we currently either monitor or manage for resource benefit.
Let me just suggest that when I was out on the side of the various mountains, we drove around spending a couple of days looking at where the fires had not been put out as soon as they could have been. I will share with you that the damage was horrific, and it wasn't just the forest public land that was damaged. So I think the bill is absolutely necessary. Let's go to another question. I note that there in your budget for this year, 2023, there's $321 million allocated to management of hazardous fuels, and I'm very happy for the effort to clean up, if you will, the forests that under your 10-year plan you're working on. But I just want to know who's doing the work, who's out there actually reducing fuel loads in the forest?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's going to be a mix. I mean, we're approaching this as all lands, all hands approach, and as you know, we work with the states, as I mentioned before, Good Neighbor Authority. We hopefully work with counties and tribes.
Let's stop there.
Okay.
When I've gone out and looked and see who's doing the work, I see contract laborers doing the work. Most speak Spanish, and it looked to me like they were doing great work, working pretty hard, but they were working under a labor contractor generally, or someone else of like nature. And I'm happy they're out there doing the work. I just want to know, is that your observation? Is that who's actually out there doing the work?
I think there are, in cases that's an observation. Yes, it's not an observation I've made. Again, I came from Arkansas, working on the Ouachita National Forest. That was primarily Forest Service employees out there, both full-time firefighters as well as what we call the militia, reserve firefighters, working hand in hand with the state and counties to do that work.
Well, that would not be the case on the West Coast. It's just, and we have 90 million acres of forest. Now, it's not all federal, but the work that's getting done in significant part is being done by folks that are not what I'll call found anxious to do that kind of work. There's the problem. I've fought fire before very badly, very poorly, and I realized really quickly it was hard, dangerous, dirty work. I've also gone out and cleaned up forests, believe it or not, when I was in high school, and it is hard, boring, hot, and most people don't want to do it. That's why I became a lawyer, so I wouldn't have to do it. And I'm just saying that it appears to me that the actual work that's being done to clean up the forest right now is primarily being done by immigrants. And I just wanted you to comment on that one more time, but if you don't know, that's fine for you to say.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, and I could talk to you about our wildland firefighter hiring numbers and those sorts of things. But I would just offer that it is a mix of contracts, it's partners through agreements, and our own employees.
The last thing I'll mention, and sorry to have focused on you this entire time, but there's a huge part of Oregon is controlled by the Forest Service. There was a prescribed burn done not too far from where one of my brothers has a ranch and has a grazing permit. And it was badly managed, and there was an absolutely clear lack of respect by the Forest Service for the private land owners. Can you comment on that? Is there someone overseeing these folks' activities? Because there seemed to be an arrogance level, a lack of respect that does not bode well for prescribed fires.
Well, I'm surprised to hear that, and certainly there is a level of oversight. We have, district ranger as a local line officer. You have your burn bosses that are qualified through our rigorous process, as well as forest supervisor and on up from there. So if that's the case, we've as Escapes in New Mexico drove us to pause our prescribed fire activities, do a comprehensive review of that program, and have made changes as a result of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Next, I'd like to recognize Mr. Moylan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Heathaker, it's good to see you again. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the informational trip we had to the Yale School of Forestry and the Yale Forest as much as I did. Of course, it was very interesting to hear about the Yale forest managers and the response to this complex challenge they have in their forest. And for yourself, Troy, as someone who has spent time in a lot of different national forests across the country, can you just expand and talk about how important it is to empower individual forest services units to meet the unique needs facing their forest?
Yeah, the examples, thank you for the question. It's good to see you again, too. It was a great trip. I enjoyed just the time together to talk forest policy and think about where we're heading with how we manage these great public lands that we're entrusted to steward. The trying to answer any question in the Forest Service, with one answer is really challenging. I mean, we have forests from Florida all the way up to, central Alaska. And so having the ability to shape management and activities based on those specific ecosystems, what the local public and the communities need in terms of resource management and benefits I wouldn't say it's a challenge, it's an opportunity for us. And so we have to be flexible. We have to understand what each of those ecosystems, each of those forest types needs. And like I said, working across boundaries with the partners and being as collaborative we can is really critical for us to get that work done.
Thank you for that. Next question is for Mr. Johansson. I believe the best solutions come from the ground up and are locally led. The Fire Sheds Act allows states and local entities to address fire sheds on both federal and non-federal land. How would this state and local knowledge help the Forest Service in treating more wildfire-prone areas?
I mean, I think it just comes from local knowledge in the history of the forest. And as I said before, as far down, it's true in politics even, right? The most responsive is always how far down you can get to local, whether that's politics or whether that's managing a forest or a fire shed. There's going to be more you bring in the counties and you bring in the tribes who live there and it's their home. You're going to have a much more responsive push to address the situation that the forests need in terms of managing them. So I think ultimately too, you have another partner. You have another partner at the local level, to assist, because we know that the Forest Service, in terms of acreage that they have to manage, is overwhelmed. We can see that in terms of even after a fire, we can only reseed up to 8,000 acres, a year. So I think it's imperative that you start looking locally and look down for more assistance for the Forest Service, and then even at the state level.
Thank you for your response, panel. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moylan. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Westerman, the chairman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. It seems like I've been out in the field with all of you at some point, and I appreciate your commitment to forest stewardship and the good things that come from that. Troy, thank you and Deputy or Undersecretary Wilkes for joining us on the field hearing last week, or field trip last week. And we saw how difficult the managing that forest in Connecticut can be with the various species and the management objectives. But they don't have to do NEPA, they don't have any regulatory requirements they have to go through, they're not concerned about litigation. Throw all that on top of what your folks at the Forest Service experience, and it makes your job very difficult. And that's why as policymakers, we get frustrated, because what we're looking at are results. We want to see results on the ground, we want to see acres treated, we want to see CEs used like Mr. McClintock has got passed that show great results on the ground. We want to expand those policies. I just have to ask, did CEQ review your testimony before you were able to submit it?
Our testimony goes through a review process, yes.
Yeah, that's enough said about that. So I've been around you in the field. I know you know how to manage forests. You did a great job on the Ouachita National Forest. And I know that you're a forester and you understand what needs to happen on the ground, but you're also working in this framework and this environment that we've created here in Congress, and that's why we want to change that. Can you speak a little bit about how, when you can do your job, how successful it can be? I know the Ouachita has been one of the most productive forests in the country. It still needs a lot of work done on it, but even talk about the shortleaf pine blue stem grass restoration project and how that's benefited the red cockaded woodpecker, plus generated timber revenues to do more work on the forest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And thank you for the trip. It was a great opportunity, as I previously mentioned, for us to talk about those shared interests and how we can help better steward these lands. And in my opening remarks, I did refer to the Ouachita as being the most productive and actively managed one of them in the forests in the country. And I was surprised Chairman Tiffany didn't come back at me with Schwamigan, Nicolay, or one of those others. It's always a back and forth. But I think the work in the pine blue stem is just a shining example. If you look at how we accomplish the work through CFLRP, collaborative process, looking across land ownerships and working with partners, literally hand in hand on a prescribed fire, and also being able to deliver commercial timber products to restore critical habitat for a threatened and endangered species. As a result of that work and the ability to do that work at pace and at scale, it led, I believe, in no small part to the downlisting of the red-cockaded woodpecker. And just, again, balancing the needs of those ecosystems, the frequency of the treatments that's needed out there while delivering commercially viable products.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. It's a great example of how you can have a healthy environment and a strong economy at the same time. The two go hand in hand. It's a great example of how the intent of the Endangered Species Act was followed, which you read the Endangered Species Act and it talks about conservation and conservation and conservation. And that's how the Forest Service and other agencies get their hands tied by Fish and Wildlife when they start listing species and saying leave their habitat alone. But we need to do more projects like that. Cody, I got a chance to spend some time on the Colville Forest last summer, and I know great work that tribes are doing all across the country, and I'm a huge supporter of more good neighbor authority. We were talking about New Mexico earlier. I was down on the Lincoln National Forest. The Muscalera Apache tribe has some of the most beautiful ponderosa pine stands that you'll see anywhere, and just down the road in Lincoln National Forest, it's a moonscape where tens of thousands of acres burned and have not even, they don't even regenerate. It's so bad. But talk about how important it is to grow good neighbor authority to get tribes more involved and what we can do to help make that happen.
All right, so the legislation proposed today, I think, will accomplish that. But I mean, tribes are a great proving ground. We have the ecologic knowledge, traditional ecologic knowledge of what the landscape should look like and how we accomplish that. And I think because we fall under different regulatory frameworks, we can be examples and testing grounds for land management policies. And I think most folks that work with tribes recognize the great work that happens in an Indian country, and we can use that blueprint on our adjacent federal lands and partner with them to make sure we accomplish those same management goals.
Well, I look forward to working with you and all the tribes that are doing great work to hopefully greatly expand that good neighbor authority. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your questions. And I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony today. It is greatly appreciated. And we're going to move on to our third panel now. And while the clerk resets our witness table, I will remind the witnesses that are coming for our third panel that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. I'd also like to remind our witnesses of the timing lights, which will turn red at the end of your 5-minute statement, and to please remember to turn on your microphone. As with the first panel, I will allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. Our witnesses for the third panel are Ms. Reva Duncan, Mr. Rick Goddard, Mr. Lawrence Crabtree, and Mr. Jonathan Godis. Did I say that correctly? Hope so. Okay, we're going to start with Ms. Reva Duncan, who is the Vice President of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters. We look forward to your testimony in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Chairman Westerman, Ranking Member Nagoose, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for allowing me to appear here today. My name is Reva Duncan, and I am currently the Vice President of the Grassroots Wildland Firefighters, advocacy nonprofit, which is made up of current and former federal wildland firefighters. On December 31st, 2020, I retired from the U.S. Forest Service after 31 years with the agency. My position upon retirement was Fire Chief for the Umpqua National Forest and Roseburg and Coos Bay BLM districts in Southwest Oregon. Over the course of my career, I worked in 5 Forest Service regions on 7 national forests in Pennsylvania, Florida, Utah, California, North Carolina, and Oregon. I was an official supervisor and directly involved in hiring from 1998 until my retirement. Most of you know by now that the Forest Service and the 4 land management agencies under the Department of Interior are struggling to recruit and retain wildland firefighters. Over the last few years, this has become a critical issue that affects most communities in the U.S. Wildfires are not just a California problem, nor are they a Western problem. This past spring, numerous areas in Wisconsin, New Jersey, and others in the East experienced serious wildfires that threatened homes, businesses, infrastructure, and the health of citizens. Federal wildland firefighters are being called upon to leave their families earlier and earlier to fight these destructive fires. While I could go on and on about numerous issues facing our workforce, I'm here today to discuss hiring and the proposed bill, Direct Hire to Fight Fires. The entire hiring system needs to be critically reviewed and modernized for the next 50 years of recruiting, hiring, retaining, and promoting federal wildland firefighters. The protracted and convoluted federal hiring process typically affects entry-level firefighters the most, who are trying to get their first job as a federal wildland firefighter. However, there are other systemic issues associated with federal hiring which negatively affect long-term career employees who are denied promotions and detail assignments, who, out of frustration, stop trying to obtain different positions within the Forest Service and DOI, or end up resigning their federal job. Hiring became considerably more difficult and cumbersome with the centralization of human resources in the Forest Service, creating the Albuquerque Service Center, and the Bureau of Land Management creating the National Operations Center. In our opinion, critical effort needs to be made to take an objective look at these decisions and consider whether decentralization of HR in the Forest Service and DOI makes the most sense moving forward. This is not to disparage the employees working in HR for these agencies. They are also struggling to keep up with the workload, which is telling in the amount of turnover at both ASC and the NOC. Codifying direct hire authority would certainly provide shorter hiring timelines for critical wildland fire positions. Anything that helps expedite current hiring processes is a step in the right direction. As data shows, DHA reduces the amount of time from authorization to employee entry on duty. This bill, if it becomes law, would continue to streamline the federal hiring process as it gives greater flexibility and timeliness to hire more wildland firefighters in rural and hard-to-recruit areas. The bill also states it will address and eliminate redundancies in the federal hiring process for wildland firefighters and support personnel, streamline the process for hiring wildland firefighters and support personnel who were employed by the agency in prior years, and reduce barriers for wildland firefighters transferring between agencies. One stark example of hiring redundancy is the Forest Service does not recognize the DOI agency's employee background checks, and the DOI does not recognize the Forest Service's. This unnecessary barrier leads to significant delays in hiring firefighters between agencies and departments, and is often the last piece of red tape in the way of onboarding wildland firefighters. In the Forest Service and DOI, employees must still attach a specific Standard Form 50 notification of personnel action to the resume that proves they are current federal wildland firefighters. In the Forest Service, if they attach the wrong SF-50, the application is discarded and they are disqualified. Conversely, in the National Park Service, if an employee attaches the wrong SF-50, they're notified to provide the correct form and their package goes on to be evaluated against the other factors. These are just a couple of examples where different processes in different land management agencies affect pools of qualified candidates. We would ask Congressman Issa and the rest of the committee to include a provision in the bill to waive age requirement for veterans and others, as did the Land Management Workforce Flexibility Law. Currently, there is an age limit for permanent employees into special retirement system for federal wildland firefighters and law enforcement officers, which makes hiring veterans over the age of 37 extremely difficult. On behalf of grassroots wildland firefighters, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Next, I'd like to recognize Mr. Rick Goddard, Managing Director of Calum Technologies of Fresno, California. Mr. Goddard, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Tiffany and Ranking Member Neguse and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 3389, the Emergency Wildfire Fighting Technology Act of 2023. I currently serve as the Managing Director of Calum Technologies, a veteran-owned California-based company that has developed an aerial delivery system to fight the ever-increasing destruction of wildfires globally. Prior to joining the civilian business community, I served as an officer of Marines, specializing in aviation and particularly close air support and air defense missions. Our innovative technology and a strong private partnership have proven successful in mitigating catastrophic wildfires in several countries. But unfortunately, we cannot help in fighting wildfires here in our own country due, I believe, to bureaucracy and red tape. Here in the U.S., we're all witness of the terrifying trend, the fact that wildfire seasons now year-round and more catastrophic. With this year's heavy rainfall that has accelerated vegetation growth, which will fuel this year's wildfires, we are looking to another brutal and potentially deadly year. Just look at the situation in Alberta and British Columbia, Canada now. They've lost millions of acres already, and it's not even summer yet. The smoke and air pollution of these fires is already reaching our Midwest. In California, we have already seen high 90-degree temperatures in this past week. The Forest Service alone does not have the necessary resources to handle what's to come. They're severely understaffed, and pending on the ongoing court decision, the Forest Service could lose the ability to deploy retardant from the air altogether until the EPA issues a Clean Water Act permit, which could take years. Simply put, our state and federal fire agencies need better technologies now more than ever. We're here today advocating for putting another tool in the toolbox for combating and preventing the mass destruction we experience from wildfires today. Containerized Aerial Firefighting System, or CAFS, has already been adopted across the globe. Currently, it's being used in Romania, Peru, Greece, Uruguay, Bulgaria, and now Israel. Still, because of the Forest Service's refusal or inability to complete the necessary evaluation, CAFS is not currently approved for use in the United States. In 2015, the United States Air National Guard highlighted and recommended the use of container delivery system-based capability, and today we call that CAFS. The Air Guard noted that the airdrop-capable disposable containers with liquid payloads dramatically increases the number of airlift assets available to respond to wildfire emergencies, providing a 24-hour capability to attack wildfires. CAFs can be dropped from any rear-loading cargo aircraft, transforming the thousands of cargo planes and helicopters currently in our inventory into aerial firefighting platforms, and that's without any modifications to the airframes. These systems are affordable and immediately available, and they are exclusively or effectively support our country's ability to fight wildfires day and night. It is important to note that a CAFS airdrop eliminates the need, potentially, of those most harmful chemicals in traditional airdrop retardants, and those are the anti-corrosion chemicals currently required for direct contact retardants. And this is because the CAFS-based alternative does not require the liquid payload to come in contact with the aircraft. This CAFS benefit also significantly, by orders of magnitude, reduces the post-mission maintenance cost and downtime on aircraft that is currently required in order to clean off the retardant residue after each mission. HR 3389 provides an opportunity for the latest aerial firefighting technology, like CAFS, to be evaluated and the operational protocols to be updated based on the results of the evaluation. California has a long history of large wildfires, which is why the California Department of Forestry, Fire Protection has the largest and most advanced wildfire fighting operations in the nation, and yet they are still having to make the tragic decision as to which homes and communities to save and which are left to the ravages of a wildfire. HR 3389 would provide fire crews with new wildfire fighting technologies like CAFS, thus providing a rapid surge response as they are able to battle to save lives, homes, and businesses while battling to stop the awful destruction of our forests and the environment. Chairman Tiffany and Ranking Member Neguse, the members of this subcommittee, I am thankful for this opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. And will the gentle lady from Colorado introduce our next witness?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am honored to introduce the president of Colorado Association of Ski Towns and former mayor of Glenwood Springs, Colorado, Jonathan Godis. Thank you so much for being here today. As a mayor, he and I worked together on several issues to address challenges with living in the Western Slope, from securing emergency funding after a mudslide in the Glenwood Springs Canyon that closed Interstate I-70, to supporting the South Bridge project, and today discussing the critical housing needs for firefighters and other communities containing Forest Service land. I am excited to continue to work with now President Godis in his new role, along with the gentleman and ranking member from Colorado, to find creative solutions to address community housing needs like the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnerships Act. And I'm also thrilled that today's legislative hearing includes numerous pieces of legislation to advance active forest management. Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, I am so honored that you are here in Washington, D.C. with us today, and thank you so much. You are now recognized for your 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Boebert. Good afternoon, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Neguse, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jonathan Godis, and I am the president of the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, representing 41 municipalities and counties that are largely dependent on tourism and the ski industry. I'm also the former mayor and current city councilor of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. I am sincerely grateful for the opportunity to be here today to share the association's robust support of the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act. Colorado's mountain communities, such as Steamboat Springs, Vail, Breckenridge, and my community of Glenwood Springs, have long been known for their natural beauty, unparalleled outdoor recreational opportunities, and vibrant tourism industry. A decade-long housing crisis threatens all sectors of our economy and workforce, including seasonal and permanent employees of the United States Forest Service. Many essential workers, including outdoor recreation industry professionals, healthcare workers, teachers, firefighters, and service industry employees, struggle to find housing. This forces large proportions of our workforces to far-flung bedroom communities up to 90 miles away, requiring long daily commutes over high mountain passes, often during major snowstorms, resulting in increased traffic congestion, decreased quality of life, and a diminishing sense of community. Businesses of all sizes and sectors struggle to fill a long list of open positions, and high turnover depletes public and private sector organizations of critical talent as employees relocate elsewhere in search of an affordable place to raise their families. Our housing crisis is driven in part by lack of private land available for residential development. Federal lands make up more than 80% of our region's land mass. Forest Service parcels located in or adjacent to town centers have the potential to serve as incredibly valuable redevelopment opportunities in our mountain communities. The reauthorization of the enhanced leasing authority in the Farm Bill would allow for continued partnership among local governments, private industry, and the Forest Service as we work together to cut red tape on very complicated but much-needed workforce housing projects. For example, Steamboat Springs, Routt County, and the Routt National Forest are exploring residential development options for vacant administrative parcels that could be home to 100 units of affordable housing. The town of Dillon and Summit County, Colorado, are making progress on the redevelopment of underutilized and dilapidated work center into a 163-unit housing project. In Eagle County, there's the potential to build an additional 300 affordable housing units over 6 parcels. Projects like this are critical to our ability to address the severe shortage of labor that threatens the profitability of our small businesses and large ski industry partners alike. They would furthermore provide sorely needed housing options for the U.S. Forest Service, where unfilled positions hinder important work related to wildfire mitigation, natural resource protection, and the administration of recreational permits by private businesses. For cast members, communities to pursue affordable housing project under this act in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, 2 elements of particular importance I'd like to speak about. One, and probably the most important, is the ability to do a 100-year lease term. Given the extremely high cost of development in resort communities, this time frame on the lease term is very necessary to secure the financing required by the developers. And then 2, to allow credit for off-site accommodation of U.S. Forest Service needs. As an example, For a U.S. Forest Service site in Aspen, construction of a warehouse, workshop, visitor center, and administrative offices would be incompatible with residential neighborhoods. The needs could be better met on separate land owned by project partners, potentially outside city limits. By receiving credit for making these improvements for the Forest Service through a mutual lease, the partners would have greater flexibility to develop multiple parcels in the most efficient and effective ways. We request that the local communities be granted the ability to bring non-federal lands to the table, and that credit for U.S. Forest Service use of those lands be included in the calculation of the local community contributions. The Forest Service manages dozens of administrative sites in Colorado that are vacant, underutilized, neglected, and in need of significant capital improvements for the purposes of employee housing. By pursuing this renewed leasing authority, we hope to better utilize federal lands to address a crisis that hobbles the public and private sector employers throughout the region. We respectfully request this subcommittee's support in the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnership Act of 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Godis. And next, Mr. McClintock, will you introduce our final?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am very honored to introduce Lawrence Crabtree, who has devoted 50 years of his life, fully a half a century, to the U.S. Forest Service. He has a forestry degree from the University of Idaho with additional courses in advanced forest ecology from UC Berkeley. He's worked in line positions as district ranger in Nevada and California, as deputy forest supervisor, and as forest supervisor in California. He's held every conceivable position: firefighter, dozer boss, falling boss, logistics section chief, incident commander, and was an agency administrator on some of the largest fires in California. I'll simply say this. It was my pleasure to work with him when he managed the El Dorado National Forest in California, and he is the best damned forester I have ever met. Just saying.
Okay. So, thank you. And Chairman Tiffany and Ranking Member Neguse, I will try to make comments that substantiate some of those warm introductory comments. I did submit written testimony, and I think I'm just going to try to visit for a bit. And if that gets a little too difficult, I'm going to tell some fire stories that I think will illustrate the point I'm trying to make. For me, it isn't that hard to believe that we should be putting out fires. I started doing that in 1971, and I pretty well stuck with it for the next 50 years. I understand the need to introduce fire into the forests. I've got a solution for that. My message is, now's not the time to play around with fires. And I'm serious about saying that. I worked and lived in California for many years, but I've also fought fire in many other states, including some here in the East. And so, and I think I need to say this too, in preparation for coming here, I talked to a number of people, both inside the agency and outside the agency. And I think that's why I'm glad I'm not a decision maker here. I'm a witness. This is a kind of a divisive issue. If you talk to a lot of Forest Service people, particularly in the fire service, oh, we got to have all the tools. We might need to make a resource decision here to let this fire go until we get in a place where we can deal with it. I understand that. But if I talk to people who are outside the forest boundary, who maybe own land or cabins or ski areas or power lines, they're not so down with managing a fire for resource benefits and not even sure what that means, but it means that we're not suppressing it. And so my message is, and it wasn't that hard to do. I was doing it in the 70s. When I was a forest supervisor on the El Dorado, we met and said, with our partners, our CAL FIRE partners, we're going to put fires out on this forest. We have enough smoke in the air in California. We've contributed enough carbon. We are going to put fires out, all of them. And even with that, we weren't entirely successful. So I think that's an important point. Well, my other point is, there are people in the agency, and it came up here earlier. Well, the Forest Service owns this land. And, you know, part of my experience with Congressman is it's not Forest Service land. We manage it for the people. And if you have that in your mind that it isn't ours as a Forest Service official, yes, we have responsibility, a lot of responsibility on what to do there, but we have to keep our eye on the people that own it around us. And right now, I haven't found many people, I didn't talk to many people that think, oh, we'll use alternative suppression tactics. And, you know, you might be at risk. We hope not. We're successful 99% of the time. Well, you know, we have a lot of fires. 1% of a whole lot of fires isn't a good number. And so, so what I'm going to conclude with here really is now's not the time to do anything but suppress fires, at least in the West, I think. And that if you want to have a resource benefit from burning, then you can do the planning for it, and you can tell the public why you're doing it, and you can tell the public where the money's coming from to do it, and then you can have a prescribed fire. This idea that you would let a lightning strike decide where on your forest was a priority is really hard for me to, you know, to really grasp. And after 50 years of service, I should understand why that's important. I think it is because it's natural, and the forests really respond well to natural things like lightning. And I'm going to say the forests aren't natural right now, and this isn't the time to choose alternative strategies. That's I think that's really what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. You're going to have some questions here. So I'd like to recognize Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, and thank you to the witnesses again. And Mr. Crabtree, I just want to follow up with a hearty amen on what you just said from one forester to the other. There is a proper time and place for fire, but it's not when your forests are overgrown, overstocked, dried out, and bug infested. And I think that the data shows we're in that situation, especially in California and in a lot of the dry forests. And unfortunately, the thing we need to do right now, or the Forest Service needs to be doing, is putting these fires out as soon as they start. We've seen a lot of data where this is not only destroying Forest Service property, it's also burning private property as well on backfires that they set. But Ms. Duncan, good to see you again. And kind of in light of what I was just saying about Mr. Crabtree's testimony, you know, I think we all want to see better pay for our wildland firefighters, but we also want to see our forests managed better. We want to keep these firefighters safe, and the best way to keep them safe is keeping them from having to fight so many fires. So can you please talk about why it's important for us to comprehensively address the challenges that wildland firefighters face, including better pay, but also better management on the ground?
Thank you, Chairman Westerman. Yes, you know, a lot of the things we're talking about today, a lot of people have left out the wildland firefighters on the ground who are doing the difficult work. And I want to thank Congressman Neguse for once again reintroducing Tim's Act that has a comprehensive package to take care of our federal wildland firefighters who show up every day. And so federal pay has lagged, you know, far behind much of the municipalities and state agencies in the West, some in the East as well, and certainly even private like PG&E and some insurance companies are luring away federal wildland firefighters for better pay and benefits. And so in order for us to, you know, retain and recruit federal wildland firefighters, we really need to look at comprehensive reforms in pay, housing, benefits, both mental health benefits and physical health benefits that we're talking about here today. So thank you for that question.
In your opinion, has the Forest Service been transparent about its hiring practices with wildland firefighters?
Yeah, yes. We struggle sometimes with them providing their numbers of actually who's been onboarded because they tend to look at how many offers are made
But because the system takes so long to onboard people, a lot of them give up and take positions other places because it just takes too long and they need a job. And so anything we can do to streamline and expedite federal hiring will greatly affect recruiting new firefighters into the workforce.
Yeah, and it's embarrassing that I even have to talk about this in this committee, but you may be aware that the committee passed legislation last week that would allow the use of aerial fire retardant. It's hard to imagine that we live in a world where people want to outlaw aerial fire retardant. As a former firefighter, can you please talk about the importance of aerial fire retardant as a tool in protecting the health and safety of wildland firefighters? And you can be brief on that one.
And I'm currently, I am an emergency hire. I still go out and fight fires. It's a valuable tool in the toolbox. I know there are concerns with some of the issues in the retardant that can affect aquatic animals, but firefighters take those into account, and we still need every tool in the toolbox, and it does help keep firefighters and communities safer.
And Mr. Crabtree is a former Forest Service official. How far behind is the Forest Service in treating our forest at the pace and scale necessary?
They're way behind. It's going to take millions and millions of dollars, which are now coming into the agency. I don't know in a number of years how far behind, but we've got a long way. It took 100 years to get where we're at, and I'm not going to say it's going to take 100 years to get out of it, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, and it really took probably the past 30 years to get in the more devastating position that we're in, but I agree with you, it's going to take time to undo the damage that's been done, but it's possible to do it if we can just let the forestry professionals do their job. I yield back.
Thank you for your questions. I'd like to recognize the ranking member now for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I know votes are called, so I will skip the questions that I had planned just to simply say first, thank you to Mr. Godus for being here, for your support of the Forest Service Flexible Housing Partnerships Act of 2023, and of course for the work that you do at the Colorado Association of Ski Towns. And as a representative who represents many of the communities, of course, that are members of your organization and home, in my view, the second district to the best ski resorts and ski resort communities in the country. It's a pleasure to be able to have you before this committee. And this bill, I think, couldn't be more important for the reasons that you stated during the course of your testimony. The ability to provide affordable housing options for our Forest Service workers, for our wildland firefighters, for first responders, just very important. And I think this bill is a common sense way to accomplish that, and a way for us as a Congress on a bipartisan basis to support those efforts at the local level. So proud of the bill, and again, grateful for you being here. And then to Ms. Duncan, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you again, and certainly we're grateful for the work that you are doing on behalf of wildland firefighters, and I couldn't agree with you more in response to Chairman Westerman's question. We all know there is a serious pay cliff approaching. The clock is ticking. We have limited time to address it. And I have been beating the drum here in Congress, of course, for years with respect to the comprehensive reforms that I think we need to get done as described and articulated in my bill and Tim's Act that we've spoken about, and of course you all have advocated for. But in addition to that bill, we've got to get this pay cliff resolved. And I just hope that we can work on a bipartisan basis, Mr. Chairman, both within the subcommittee, within the larger full committee, and of course with our partners in the Government Oversight and Reform Committee to get this done. Because a lot of wildland firefighters across the country who bravely sacrifice so much on our behalf are counting on us to get it done and to get it right. So no questions, but again, just want to thank you, Ms. Duncan, Mr. Godus, and all of the witnesses for their testimony. I yield back.
I'd like to recognize Mr. McClintock for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crabtree, you're familiar with the Tamarack Fire in the Humboldt-Toyobe National Forest. How difficult would it have been to put that fire out during the 10 days that it smoldered on a quarter acre?
I couldn't quite hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry. How much, what would, How difficult would it have been to put out the Tamarack fire during the 10 days that it smoldered
Yeah.
on a quarter acre?
Yeah, so I wasn't there, and it's kind of hard for me to say, but I would say it wouldn't have been that hard.
How much do you think it would have cost?
A few $1,000s.
For a helicopter drop or two?
Bring a couple of people in.
What's the cost of fighting a 17,000 acre fire, which is what the Tamarack became?
Yeah, it's going to be millions.
So obviously, what would be cheaper? Restoring the 10 a.m. rule and applying resources to put out a lot of small fires immediately, or waiting until one of those fires explodes out of control?
Yeah, I think that's the issue here is the risk is not high. The probability of an escape is not high, but the risk can have a very, very significant price, particularly for people out and property owners outside the agency boundaries.
Right. What role do local fire departments have in combating incipient fires on federal lands?
Yeah, well, we try to have agreements up front and before the season starts to, sort of match their capabilities and their, I guess, interest in attacking fires. But, in California, there is a, first responder kind of a local, closest responder kind of rule. We'll send the closest resources normally to the fire that are available. And that should mean if it's a CAL FIRE engine closest to the fire and it's on the forest, they'll send a CAL FIRE engine.
Have you heard of instances where when local firefighters were warned off initial attacks on fires on federal lands?
I have heard stories like that, but I can say from my back, I can say no specifics that I know about that happened.
Well, we heard about that on the Tamarack fire. We heard about that on the I think it was the Doofers fire, which preceded it in the same area by 20 years. And I've had local firefighters make bitter complaints about that. Not in the El Dorado National Forest, but in others. You tried for years to get the trestle project completed. What obstacles did you face?
Well, I really, it's almost difficult for me to go back and visit the trestle fire because a few days ago, I visited the aftermath of the Caldor fire, and it's just sobering to see that much country, very productive timberland, some of the most productive timberlands in California, and there won't be a forest there for 400 years at least. And it's as far as you can see. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
And the trestle project would have prevented that, would it not?
Well, it would have
certainly for
it would
grizzly
definitely,
cloud.
yeah. So what it would done is given firefighters a more likely chance to be successful. That's how I like to put
And
it.
what obstacles did you face in trying to
Well,
get that?
one of the
completed?
obstacles of the trestle project that took years to get through was it was one of the hot spots or highest densities area for California spotted owls. And so, if you're an agency decision maker, you don't want to start making decisions that lead a species towards being endangered. And so you want to leave the habitat.
How's that spotted owl habitat today?
That's the thing. It's gone. And
Along with the town. I mean, I was there in the downtown section. You can't, there's no point of reference. Everything is leveled to the ground. Even folks that have lived there their entire lives tell me they don't know their way around because they can't find a single point of reference to orient.
I agree.
Let me just very quickly put one final question to you that I did to Mr. Hightaker. Why is it that private landowners make money keeping their forests in healthy condition, and today the Forest Service ends up losing money and our forests are in terrible condition?
Oh, gosh, that's a difficult question. Well, let's say the Forest Service can't harvest any tree over 30 inches in diameter, as an example, without a big, lot of rationale behind it. And that's just one thing that comes to mind. They don't have the freedom that private landowners have to properly manage their lands because of the laws that we've passed. Is that essentially it in a nutshell? It is, but I like to say also the Forest Service has a little bit different mission than the private landowners. They can harvest and make money and then turn that land into something else, which is not uncommon. We have a long-term, our mission is future generations.
Right.
The needs of current and future generations. And so, you know, we're just going to be a little different. Maybe we should be a little closer together.
Yeah, well, I mean, we used to make a lot of money on federal
Yes.
timber auctions and keep the forests healthy and resilient for generations to come. And as you point out, nature doesn't mind waiting centuries for a forest to regrow. We mere mortals don't have that luxury. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I just have a couple questions, and we got a break. I got to get, all of us got to get down and cast a vote. Mr. Goddard, you referenced the smoke that's coming. I live in the upper Midwest, and boy, we are seeing it all over Wisconsin, Minnesota, and upper peninsula of Michigan. The Forest Service, in the previous testimony, I got the impression they expressed reservations about cast. What's going on there?
Well, quite frankly, I would say what's going on is they don't want to take the time to evaluate the system. Certainly, we've experienced overseas great success. The question about safety was answered in probably the most detailed form by the Israeli Air Force. Recall that back in 2018, tragically, we had a firefighter killed from an airdrop, a low airdrop, and it caused a revamp of all of the safety parameters for VLAT airdrops or large tanker airdrops. And what we found is the CAF's systems have a less than 0.5% of the drop zone is considered risk, whereas 100% of the drop zone is considered risk with the tankers, and that's because the payload is moving laterally by 80 to 100 miles an hour. So the CAF system is falling like rainfall, and you do have the containers that come down, but they're well within the drop zone area. So the great question is, so why don't you want to look at it? If other countries around the world are using it, it's produced in California, why don't you just want to take a look?
So some of us think that there's this movement to not suppress fire. Might that be part of it?
Yes, sir. That's a great question. When I was interviewed down in South America for Defensa, which is a large defense magazine that covered our system going to Peru and Uruguay and now into Chile, they asked that question and said, you make it in California, why aren't you using it? And the commander that was with me said, oh, I have that answer. It's because we want to put fires out, and we want to put them out quickly. And that was one of the aspects of our system is a rapid response 24 hours a day, converting either...
So you're selling these around the world, but not in California?
Correct.
And not in the United States?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I just want to ask one final question. Mr. Crabtree, you received the ultimate compliment when Mr. McClintock said you're the best dam forester. I used to be a dam man. I used to think of myself as the best dam man managing the Willow Reservoir in northern Wisconsin, so I've got a little bit in common with you. I can only take about a minute here. What's changed since we see the charts that show, I always view 1988 as a watershed year for the United States Forest Service and federal land management. What happened? What changed?
Okay, I think the culture changed in the agency. The climate's changed. And the public's tolerance for forest management has changed. And now maybe that's going to shift, but that's my answer to your question.
So in other words, as a result of saying we're going to make all these changes, now the American public has, as so often happens, the pendulum swings. And as a result, we've seen these devastating fires. You said 400 years before we're going to see forest back there.
Yeah.
Is that just the sterilization of the ground?
No, it's 400 years before you see a forest. You will find trees there in 100 years. Forests are complicated, and they have large trees and small trees, and they have there's a lot of things going in a forest. So when I think of a forest, it's not just a row of a pine that's 80 years old.
Sure.
I mean, that was what I was thinking there.
Yeah, We have to wrap this up. I'd like to thank all the witnesses here. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here. We really appreciate it. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, and we will ask that you respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, May 26th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the Subcommittee on Federal Lands stands adjourned.